Hey, what's up everyone? Getting a lot of requests for video tutorials. So here's a quick one on this Luke Cage drawing I did. Once you have your file scanned and cleaned up, I'm going to bring it into Photoshop. First, what I'm doing here is naming the line work layer so you don't get confused. Create a new layer and place it underneath your line work, and that's where your colors are going to go. Set the line work layer to multiply, and you change your file to CMYK, which is a common print mode. First thing I'm going to do is flats. So I got my lasso tool set to anti-aliased. I use the polygon lasso. You can use whichever one you want. But basically I go in and I trace out the figure. With a pencil drawing you can be a little bit more loose with where your shapes go, but if it's an ink drawing you got to be pretty tight about it. I'm going to go in and trace out the figure like that. And I will fill it with a medium gray. Just have a kind of a placeholder color. Next I'm going to create his yellow for his lovely yellow blouse that Luke Cage wears. So you go in and select that shape with your lasso. And I fill it with a kind of medium brownish yellow. You don't want to go too light or too dark for this base color. Kind of darken it up just a little bit. Next thing I'll do is flat out his hair. I'm just going to fill that with black. So, like I said, you can be a little bit loose with where you're going with these if it's a pencil sketch. You want to make sure you get all your areas, sideburns, eyebrows, eyeballs, all that good stuff. Another thing is you want to make sure your color layer is locked. Otherwise it'll start filling areas outside of where you want your colors to go. You can change that in your layers palette. So I'll fill that up there with black. The next thing I want to do is the skin tone. Skin tones can be a little bit tricky. You don't want them to be too orange or too green or too blue, so it takes a lot of trial and error to kind of get them right. Luckily with a darker skin color like this, it tend to be a little bit easier to color because you can add a little bit more contrast than a Caucasian character. Like a nice medium brown there. And first thing I'm going to do is start rendering out the light and shadows on his shirt. So I'll pick a much lighter yellow. And I'll grab my lasso tool. And once I establish my light source, I'm going to use a gradient tool to create the illusion of light actually hitting the shirt. So I grab my gradient and I set it to foreground to transparent at about 30%, 32% on a normal setting. And you just keep going over gradients until you get what you're looking for. And you do that for the rest of the shirt too. Just keep in mind of where shadows are going to fall, where the light's actually going to hit. Try to create a sense of, depth Obviously, the inside of his collar is not gonna, have the same color as the where the light's hitting. So you got to keep that in mind. Just picking out a little highlight here. Normally for a print piece, I would go into a lot more depth with my gradients and selections, but this is just a quickie sketch, not really for anything other than kind of giving you guys an idea of where, how I work on things. Lightening up his tiara here. Yes, it's a tiara. Creating a little bevel there. I always want to try to create the illusion of depth, even though it's a 2D image. I'm also going to add a photo filter here, a cooling filter, which gives it just a little bit of a blue tone, more of a metal look to it. And the next I'm going to whiten up his eyes. Again, using my gradient. The next thing I'm going to do is pick his skin tone for where the highlights are going to fall. This can get a little bit tricky. It takes some trial and error sometimes. Sometimes you get down the first try. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. And here I'm making my selections as to where light is actually going to be hitting his face. I'm taking away the shadows, basically. Again, you're trying to create a 3D look in a two-dimensional space. So you have to be very aware of where light's going to hit on the face. So naturally under his nose, his upper lip is going to be a little bit darker than when, where the light hits his forehead or the bridge of his nose. Now that color doesn't really look right. It looks a little too yellow. So I'm going to go back and get rid of that. Change the color a little bit. Looks a little better. Still not sold on it. So I'm going to change it up again. Take a little bit of the cyan out. And I think that looks pretty good there. I have the initial where the light's going to hit. I go in and start picking out other highlights like his jawbone and choose the gradient again. Pick out some other highlights here. I kind of jump all over the place on this one. I wasn't too terribly exact on everything. Like I said, if it's going to be a print piece or it's a commission, you want to make sure everything is really tight, clean, just so everyone involved is happy. But this is just for, shits and giggles. So hopefully you'll just get a decent idea of how I do this. I'm just going in and following where I had established the original light source, creating some more shadows and highlights. Just keep using that gradient tool and building things up. Sometimes I'll pick out other shapes around his eyes that aren't generally created there when I draw the image. But that's, part of the fun part of coloring. You can, add and enhance to what you've already had created with your pencil. It's got a pretty broad chin, so you definitely want to put some highlights on that. And also, got highlights on the nose. I think I go in here and do some around his upper lip. Basically go in and do the same type of thing around his ears, just keeping in mind where light hits different surfaces of the ears. You learn a lot of that from drawing actual people, not giant superheroes in tights, but you can, once you learn the basics, you can apply that to a simplified animation style form like this. And once I have pretty much everything figured out here, Adam's apple neck, we're going to need highlights. It doesn't have to be perfectly anatomically correct. You definitely want to have somewhat of a sense of realism in the way light hits things. Next, what I'm going to do is darken up the line work a little bit. I copy the line work into a new channel and load that selection on my color layer, and I invert it, and then I colorize that. That way it'll darken up the line work a little bit, add a little more saturation and contrast to it, so it sticks out a little bit more. I'm going to duplicate the line work layer again later just to get a little more contrast, but right now I'm adding a paper texture to the background. I already found that online. So I'll copy it and I will paste it underneath my color layer, size it up correctly. I'm going to make some adjustments to it. I don't really like the color it has. I'm going to desaturate it a little bit. Add a little bit of contrast using the levels. I'm also going to add a little bit of that paper texture to the figure there by creating a clipping mask and setting it to overlay and reducing the opacity a little bit, so it just adds a little bit of texture to the figure. And I'll duplicate the line work layer again to beef it up a little and reduce the opacity. And that's about it. You'll add your signature and that'll be about it. Hopefully that'll give you a little bit of insight into how I do things. Yeah, thanks for checking it out.